Oh. Hey, everybody, we're making it happen again. Welcome back. We're getting ready for another episode of On the Schmooze Live. I'm pretty excited that we're now doing all these live streams, and you'll be able to catch the audio version of this will be coming out in early January. So I want to just give people a little understanding of who I've got in the room with me today. So let me do the formal introduction. Today's guest believes that healing, awareness, empathy, and engagement are critical in today's increasingly connected yet polarized world. Her work aims to support deeper connections and mutual understanding among different groups toward a more equitable society. She's a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist, coach, and international keynote speaker. She has worked with organizations across all sectors on DEI, intercultural communication, supplier diversity, and employee engagement. Her expertise has been featured in media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, NPR, and the Washington Post. Her latest book, The Power of Employee Resource Groups: How People Create Authentic Change, shares how to build ERGs to empower underrepresented employees and positively impact diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within organizations and society. Please join me in welcoming Farzana Nayani.
Thank you so much, Robbie, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Farzana, you're joining us all the way from LA. Thrilled to have you here. As you know, this is a show about building strong networks, but the context is leadership. So tell me, how did you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Leadership for me actually came on in my awareness about my identity. My mother's from the Philippines, my father's from Pakistan with roots in India. And I think when you have a variety of different cultures in your household, and also how that can be different from mainstream society, it can really be a challenge to define who you are as a person, never mind leadership. So I think growing up, I was always exposed to sort of like the silent, strong leadership, the leadership by doing, not just by saying. And those are things that I've incorporated into my own leadership style. But what I would say is, kind of the pinnacle of when I found my own leadership was when I went out on my own and became an entrepreneur and started my own business around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was partly to do with my children. So I have two kids that are 12 and 10 now, but they were, younger at the time and needed me more at home. And this was before, the remote working thing was a big thing. So I managed to, start my own business, but I really thought it would be a slow uptick and it would take time. But lo and behold, there was a lot that I learned about telling my own story as the way that I could, meet clients and reach people. And so I think what I would say that leadership is it's finding yourself, knowing who you are, and then being able to tell your story as a way to connect with and reach other people.
I love that you started with kind of family of origin stuff, because clearly the cultural differences were stark, and gave you some things to think about that maybe some of us haven't had a chance to think about. That you had these sort of different methods of leadership by doing, sort of quiet leadership. That sometimes when you're a kid, you're like, I can't imagine doing those things. But then as you kind of grew into yourself, and of course being an entrepreneur is all about leading self. I want to wind the clock back a little bit, though, because you started talking a little bit about family. And I want to go back to those early days. What were you like on the playground? Were you watching the kids? Were you organizing the kids? Did you run for office? In high school, did teachers see you and think, oh, Farzana's got that leadership quality? Like, what kind of kid were you?
It was quite a stark contrast from what you just described. I was quiet, I was shy, I didn't talk to anybody. I remember wishing I would learn how to carry a conversation at a meal if I was having a meal with a friend's parents or something. I just was very self conscious and didn't have the confidence about being who I was. And so when you meet me now, and when people hear this part of my journey, they're very surprised. I'm very talkative now. I'm very outspoken. And in fact, people think that I'm from the East Coast or something. I've heard people say that because I'm direct. sometimes, but that's not my nature. I've had to norm to, right, the world around us and what's expected of us in terms of being a leader. That being said, I would say that I really grew to be an observer. And I think that part of being a really good leader is to know your surroundings and to understand people around you. And so I listened a lot, I observed a lot, and I still do. Even though I work with a number of clients and many people want my opinion, I spend a lot of time hearing from them first. I spend a lot of time continuing to educate myself, going to conferences. If I'm asked to speak at a conference, I'll make sure I attend some of the sessions because there's so much richness in who we are as people and how we can learn and develop. So I don't think that it ever goes away. I think it's a lifelong mission and journey. And at the same time, as we model our own leadership to others, I think people seeing me as a brown woman, a woman of color, a woman with, a diverse background, it can be inspiring to them to think about, what traits of leadership they can incorporate or celebrate as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. Just living your best life is a great way to be a role model to other people. So Farzana, you were talking about, who you were as a kid and how it sort of doesn't match how people perceive you today, which is one of the reasons I love asking that kind of question, because when there is sort of a disconnect between like, oh, but you look very confident today. Like I only know you as a superstar. And then you hear with these sort of more humble, quiet beginnings. I think it gives people listening an understanding that regardless of where they are in life, like they can start where they are and like grow. I'm curious, when did that start to shift for you? Like when did you start to find that voice? Was it in your teen years? Was it in college, after college? Like when did you start to, I don't know, stand in your own power?
Yes, there's an additional part to the story was that I got really involved with athletics and sports growing up early on. So I played basketball, was my first love. I played soccer, volleyball, and I ran track. And I happened to excel at all of these. I was the starter of a lot of my teams. And I remember there was a top 10 on track on all the events, and I got, I think, 7 out of 10 in the top 10
Wow.
on that, right, in the school and the grade I was in. So I parlayed that into making some teams, and I actually grew up in Canada. I grew up in Vancouver, and I had a British basketball coach who said, "Hey, why don't you play this other game called netball, Netball? It's a Commonwealth sport." And I ended up making like the juniors for Canada. And why do I bring this up? It's because I learned a lot about leadership from my coaches. I learned a lot about teamwork. I learned about not putting myself first, but really connecting and bonding with others. And I learned about being in the gym with other genders. So being a woman, I was fine as a girl. I'd play 21 with the guys and beat them. And I think like when I go into business settings, it doesn't bother me if I see men around me, like a whole room full of men, if it's like a finance situation or whatever it is. Like it really doesn't bother me. And I think that those things that I experienced early on affected who I am. So the turning point, the pivot was, when I was in college, and so formative for many people. But I started to take courses around literature and understanding culture. And it just was this light bulb. It was a spark that came into my life. And I ended up reading a lot. And I decided to dedicate my life to intercultural awareness. And it wasn't even diversity at the time that I studied, it was communication. And I was just so interested and inspired about how to connect with people from different cultures and really bridge differences. So that was my passion, and it's stuck with me. And even now, when I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, really for me, it's about creating common understanding and having people connect with each other and be a part of each other's lives. So that's the place I come from with my work, and I know that's different than some other people. But really, I come into it thinking that we can create community together.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking my language for sure. This is how I sort of approach it. In fact, I got into the world of virtual events because prior to the pandemic, I'd spent a decade teaching people how to network at events, at conferences, because I believe events are about content and connection. That's why we made the effort to get on planes and travel. And so when virtual became ubiquitous as the only way we're really communicating, I thought, well, we can't have this be the exception to that rule. We have to find a way to create content and connection in this new mode. And I mean, like you, it's like, how do we have those community conversations? How do we build that connection, that space? You were just talking though about how sports really influenced sort of you and gave you an opportunity to really engage and show up in a different way and excel and be seen as a leader and try out, the experience of being on a team and teamwork. And that starts to also change like even your understanding of gender roles and like being comfortable being around guys. Cause I think like you may not have had a lot of that experience, and now you're competing against men and sounds like beating them. And then and I love how you sort of mirror that to like the world you have today, where you might be in a boardroom meeting with mostly, if not all, men, and like not having your voice be drowned out. So I think it's really interesting that you're able to draw that parallel. When you were 12, did you have any sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there an inkling of what you might want to go to school for or go into work for?
Not at that age, I would say no. My mom was a nurse, so I knew that service was important. I came from kind of a strong ethical background around giving back. So
Mm.
there's something around volunteering or helping the world. So I didn't have it pinned down though in terms of a career. I probably wasn't exposed to much, to be honest. Probably a teacher, and I did do education as part of my university, education. So I would say that's probably what it was like thinking about teaching.
And then when you get to college, you discover intercultural communication as being a thing, and that it really was appealing to you. I've taught some intercultural communication programs because if people give you one hour to do DE and I'm like, that could cause harm. Let's just do this. Let's like talk about how we all have these things. Like, it's really a useful starting point for some people who are not maybe there yet, or a little resistant to those conversations. At first, though, you didn't go right into your own business. Did you go for a job, like a
Yeah.
JOB job? Like, what was the path?
Yeah, I did grad school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. There's a huge Asia Pacific Islander center, and it's called the East West Center. And I got exposed to a lot of different cultures. There was a dorm with 50 different countries in there, and we had classes together. It's where Barack Obama's parents met, right? In case you're wondering, how did Kenya and Indonesia get together? It was in this center. So in that and taking, courses in Hawaiian studies, ethnic studies, etc. And where I learned the language too. I learned my mom's language there. I grew up with it. Of course, I could sound it out and understand it, but the grammar and whatnot, right, wasn't formally taught to me. So that was formative for me. And what happened there was I moved to LA, got a job doing leadership training for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with a nonprofit here in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And that's where my career took off. I ended up doing programming for them. I got recruited to another organization doing entrepreneurship and business advising. I did that for a number of years, half a decade, 5 or 6 years. And then I moved to work for a chamber. I learned about supplier diversity from on the ground, from helping businesses who are a minority and certified businesses. So I learned all about supplier diversity from that side. And you know what, Robbie, at the time, I thought to myself, it'd be really cool to have a business at some point. But I never thought it would be me. It was just something that I looked up to, all these entrepreneurs who are doing amazing things and moving and shaking. And they're so inspiring, right? Like hearing them accept awards or give speeches at events. There are a lot of role models I saw just from people who decided to follow their passion. Ended up working for a diversity training firm for a year as well. And I really learned the ropes of how the business works. But that's when, I started to focus on my kids and wanted some flexibility. But it all pieced together. If you look at the pedigree of, what I was exposed to, I think I have taken everything from all these different facets, and I really owe it to all the people I've worked with and the communities I served. But at the heart of it, I do center identity and underrepresented communities as well. So that's something that I think it weaves through the fabric of all the experiences I've had.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look back and what seemed like almost a broken road as you were taking it, leaping from one rock to another. It's like, oh no, that was a path. That was
Right. It's like a
it makes sense.
zigzag. It's just
Yeah.
sort of you go back and forth and there's switchbacks and you wonder if you're heading in a direction. But yeah, absolutely. It's helpful to look back.
Sounds like you got a lot of exposure, different kinds of exposure to entrepreneurs and small business owners through these different experiences you had, which takes the idea of perhaps having a business one day and makes it a reality. This is a thing people really do. It really exposes you to the possibility and the kind of people you need to be around. But it's still different from deciding to do it yourself. And it sounds like your kids were the impetus for wanting to, I guess, design your own life and you have some more control over your schedule. Although a lot of people leave a 60-hour work week at a day job to work 80 hours as a self-employed person. What was it for you? Like, how did you decide to move forward? Like, how did you know this was the right next step? And what kind of supports did you need to put in place to make entrepreneurship real for you?
Oh gosh, can I tell you a story I haven't told before? My heart's beating. So I remember being online and having to, work certain hours, and my kid, who was young at the time, was just trying to get my attention, and um, he ended up climbing the dresser. And you all can get mad at me for not earthquake strapping the dresser, but he actually pulled it down, and it landed, luckily, beside him. Somehow it didn't land on him. It was like an angel was watching over him, because there was like a space where he ended up, and he was like 4 or 5. And that was literally at that moment, I said to myself, I need a new situation. I've got to be more aware of myself and what my family needs, and not worry about being on the clock. So that's what did it. It was so easy for me to make that decision, and I haven't looked back. So since then, there's something that's been important to me. It's my kids and my family, and I schedule meetings, and my team knows that I have pickup time and drop off time for my kids, and wake up time and getting ready time, and it's amazing. It's liberating. I can take a day off, and take the kids somewhere when it's their day off. But I think I needed that wake up call, and I feel sad that it took that, but I really paid attention. So luckily he was fine, but we all should have the ability to balance, and I think being in this remote world has allowed us to do that. There's a lot of us being more present at home and being able to do our own cooking, and our errands, and just be more available to each other and to our families. And that's why there's so much resistance, right, to going back into the office, and I understand that. Another thing is, I used to hide that I had kids, believe it or not. When I'd interact with people, I think being, right, like a 5'3" woman of color, daughter of immigrants, and mom, right? And I breastfed my kids to like a year each, right? I just always tried to minimize the impact of what parenting was on my work. So I tried to kind of downplay it. And I think what's been liberating around being at home is people's kids and pets are popping on screens. And it's like, this is normal now. And it really should have been this whole time. I don't know why we're a norm to society where we can't be who we are in totality. And that's really the messages in my books, where it's about who you are as a person, showing up, being your whole self as much as you can, in a sense of safety that's comfortable for you in the environment you're in. But it takes us being okay with that ourselves, and not taking that down, for ourselves, where we hide, we have to cover. I understand that. But I've gone through my own version of that, and I really wish for people to be more available to who they are as a person.
Well, first, as a fellow parent, your story about your kid climbing on something and it falling over is heart pounding and scary. And I'm so glad this is a distant memory and nothing bad came of it other than the lesson that you had to learn,
Right.
which is emotionally difficult. You're not the first parent this has happened to. I like panically went around and tested all the furniture when we kept moving, like to keep reattaching things to the wall, which is my least favorite thing to do. But I was so nervous about all this. Like, you just don't know.
Exactly.
I also realized as you were talking that I've only been a parent as an entrepreneur because I left my
Mm,
day job the like December uh 2014, and December 2015, I became a parent. So when I left, I didn't know that we were about to be parents, and then we were trying, and we had a kid, one of our first, and then we had a second 2 years later. But I mean, I remember my early on, like having my little kid like in my arms, like taking calls, and I always say like, this is like it's almost like a values test. Like, do we have shared values? Like, if you're not okay with this happening or not okay with an interruption, then this isn't going to be a good fit. Like,
Right.
I will do my best to like make every meeting happen and like show up on time and have zero disruptions. I now have a lock on my door, which has really helped, but that wasn't always the case. And my wife now works at home, so we can like, juggle this a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right that now that we're all Zooming from home, we've sort of loosened up some of those. I don't know. The norms have changed, I guess, and it's nice. Work-life integration is becoming a bigger reality for a lot of people, and it sounds like that was really the impetus for you doing this, and taking this big leap. What was the first product or service that you were selling, and who were you selling it to when you first got started?
So I did and still do a lot of speaking engagements and trainings around DEI and intercultural awareness. And what has evolved is really working on the strategy of an organization, doing a lot of work around surveys and assessments, do a lot of coaching now, advising. So it sort of like runs the gamut of everything an organization needs. But it's interesting because at the time when I first started, I kept asking myself, are these trainings effective? Is it really doing anything? And I wanted to hook it into a larger plan, and that is what I'm doing. But what I'm finding is I'm returning to those speaking engagements, because what people need right now is motivation. They need, a spark of inspiration. They also need some of the technical expertise. And I talk a lot about that in my book around employee resource groups. So being able to parachute into an organization and spark the lights of so many people is so gratifying to me. And I think I'm at a different place about it. Whereas before I question, how effective is it? But I feel now that sometimes you need to have that external voice remind you of what you're doing, how you can create more. And that's where the transformation occurs. Sometimes you just need that pivotal conversation. So I'm excited to be a part of so many different versions and varieties of engaging with people. And I'm industry agnostic, so work with a lot of different
Hmm.
organizations, tech, publishing, could be healthcare, large to small businesses and corporations, higher ed, nonprofits. So, people ask me, hey, do you have expertise in this area? Well, what I want to say is you have the expertise. You're there, right? I'm the person that can stitch it together and be a cross pollinator of all the amazing best practices from all of these places. And isn't that also exciting to learn from other industries about what can be done? So I feel really strongly about that. And I think that's, maybe part of, because I'm multifaceted as a person, I'm comfortable with that as well.
So this is really interesting. When you first got started, you were focusing on speaking. Currently, it sounds like you're doing quite a lot of things, but early on, it was really focusing on these talks. Who were those initial clients? How did you find those initial clients? I know you were surrounded by entrepreneurs, but how did you find people who saw the value of what you were offering and gave you a chance to try yourself out as a, paid speaker?
There was a lot of work I had done with conferences, and I had volunteered for professional organizations, in particular around the Asian Pacific Islander community. And people who saw me there, when I told people, look, I'm going out on my own, and I'm not connected to any brand, I was worried. And it was interesting because the opposite happened. People were like, oh, what are you up to? Let me know. So they were, Team Farzana, which was like so exciting and unexpected for me. And what has happened since then is I've gotten into writing. And one of my books is on raising multiracial children. And a lot of that discussion comes from education around race and being connected to who we are as parents, who we are as educators. So I did do a lot of work with school districts, other organizations who were interested in how to bring that conversation forward. What was interesting was during the pandemic, we had the tragic murder of George Floyd, which was so impactful on the world. And then we had people schooling their kids from home or trying to do some version of education, right, while working. And so there was this nexus of people who were working professionals, who were parents, who were like, I don't know how to have a conversation with my kids around race. And so that really took off, where it was the conversation around how to have a talk with your kids about race. That was what a lot of employee resource groups wanted me to talk about. I just spoke with Google earlier this year just on that topic. I do a lot of keynotes on that. Now, would you have asked me, would that have been the topic that took off? I would have said no. That was a passion project. And I know one of your questions, Robbie, was, what was a difficult time in your life? It was trying to write that book. I had such a hard time writing that book because I thought to myself, no one will be interested in this. What am I even doing? So it took me 2 years of ideation and then finally like another year of writing, like a 3-year process to get that book out. And ironically, unbeknownst to me, was the one that people were interested in. So that was, kind of the first starting out point, but a lot around awareness and communication and understanding to start.
There's so many good things that I want to tease out of what you just said. One is you were volunteering before.
Yes.
Were you volunteering before you went out to do your own thing? Were you already volunteering?
Yes, I was. I always was. I was involved with an employee research group, association that serves people who are part of ERGs.
That's amazing. Of course, there's an association for ERGs. Of course, there's associations for everything. I shouldn't be surprised, but somehow I'm very surprised. So that's cool. So I want to underscore the fact that you were volunteering, you're building up your professional credibility. People knew you.
I was meeting a lot of people.
You're meeting
a lot of
people.
A lot of contacts, a lot of people. Yes.
Yeah, people started to know who you were, what you're about. Yeah. So that in itself is like gold. That anyone listening who's trying to make a shift either to another career, another sector, or into entrepreneurship, getting some strategic volunteering in. I mean, you can volunteer for your PTA. It will be a different experience. Volunteering in professional capacity will get you different opportunities going forward. The second thing is that you wrote a book, your first book. Now, what year did you leave your job and become an entrepreneur? Like, what was the year that
was
started?
2017.
Okay, so 2017. And what year did your first book come out?
2020.
Okay, amazing. So like you said, it was this 2-year process of ideation, a year of actually writing it, the whole time thinking, this is a passion project. No one's actually care about this topic. I just care about this topic myself. So you're putting your heart into
community members who are, I call them the mixies because we go to conferences and we're mixed race folks and we're like, hey, reunion. And I thought that would be it, and maybe it's because of a lack of representation, which is a comment on the need for it. I just thought it would kind of stay in our, circular echo chamber.
Right. Like it wouldn't be something heard beyond the kind of community that was most impacted by it. Yeah. But you still felt called to do it. And even just having a book, even if the book was slightly off of the tangent of what people wanted to hire you for, the book itself was a lot of legitimacy, right? For even if they hired you to do some other talk, the fact that you wrote a book, was helpful. But then
absolutely,
the topic, like in 2020,
it blew up.
It blew up. And you already had the book and you were positioned to be the expert to come in and have this discussion. And then you're really focusing particularly on the parenting piece. And like you said, the intersection of parents suddenly being sort of in charge of schooling their kids, and like they couldn't just lean on their schools to take care of some of this. So I mean, it's amazing like how you had sort of everything lined up for that. And there's a lot. I feel like you're just you're also intuitively listening to like what's happening and following it. And I think that I've been talking about this with other people about how those of us that are seen as either more resilient or I don't know what are the words, like we have a vision, but we're not so tied to the steps of how we get there or even exactly what success looks like. And that can sort of shift as we learn new things. And so when you learned that this was a topic of real import and that people were going to pay attention to it in a real way, there was probably something else that you'd been pushing, right? Like
Mm.
there was another talk that you were trying to push out and get known for, but you didn't get hung up on that. And like, you don't think of the other talk that didn't happen yet, by the way, as a failure. You just saw this new possibility as a huge success. And I think that there's a way in which that's a resiliency that entrepreneurs who do well are able to be more nimble and responsive to what's happening in the market. And so there's a little bit of kudos to you, but also a lesson for anyone listening about like, instead of just being like, I want to be known for this X thing, like be open to like all the things you can bring to a conversation. And you clearly had more assets than you thought were being counted on. And suddenly you were the person. So very cool. And clearly now you already name dropped like all of these great nouns, right? Like, it's multiple books. You just talked to Google, like you're working with across many different sectors. How do people like hear about you? Is it the books? Is it the talks leading to new talks? Like, what's your mechanism now for attracting people in, since you're not in a like, you're not like known as the person for this topic within X, silo or sector or industry? Like, how do you get the word spread?
Great question. I speak at conferences a lot, and most of the time, you don't get paid for speaking at conferences, or maybe some do, but it's not your standard rate. I'm just being transparent, but that's okay. I think that it's back to your point about volunteering. And giving back to the community and in the industry. I feel like that's my way of doing it. Like, I will always show up if you um, can find a way, right, to make it available for me to share about my book or share about something. So yes, I do a lot of talks around DEI and employee resource groups and race and identity. And I've developed friends. There are a lot of friends who come to these things, they're colleagues and they're part of your network, but they become like a joyous connection that you are happy to see again and again every year. So I would say that's one thing. Also, just staying in touch with people. I really try to. And people move from organization to organization, and they'll introduce you to other people. There are people who've referred me, and I don't know, I didn't know the first person who sent the referral on, but they know me, or they've seen me speak, and it was in the back of their mind. I also I'm really active on LinkedIn. And I'm authentic about it. It's not advertising for me. I just share a thought, and it gets picked up. Kind of like you, Robbie. Just like what's in your heart right now, or what's the passion you have to share. And so when there's something going on in the news, I'll try to speak to it as best as I can. If there's something going on in my life or something I'm observing as a trend, there's a lot around quiet quitting and the great resignation. And so for me, with the wars and everything going on, because of my cultural background, it's impacting the communities I'm a part of for many reasons. So I try to bring some awareness to that. And I think people really appreciate an honest, connected voice, not just, a talking head, but someone who maybe is thoughtful about what is going on, maybe brings a different perspective. So I think that's my key differentiator. But at the same time, I'm not, advertising. I don't pay for advertising. I don't do anything like in that of that nature. Maybe I could grow. Hey, I'm open to new things, but I just love, what comes into my inbox and how people find me. Or there was a major company that found me on Instagram, and I was just posting about my multiracial book, and I would share stuff about being a parent, and they had me come in and talk about that, and we did a whole series, and it's with a huge name. So there are things that I wouldn't have dreamed of that have come my way. I'm truly grateful. And there are a lot of people who I feel connected to, and I want to support them to reach their goals. There's a lot of things that I can say that others can't. So a lot of people in organizations really want me to hit home with the truth. What is on people's minds, what's in their hearts, what's a challenge. And I can say those things. They can't, because they're employed by the organization. So that is also a refreshing take that I bring.
Yeah, it must be very freeing that you're not tied to those different paychecks that they're getting, and so you can speak their truth and help them advocate from the inside. You just shared so many great tips that I always ask this question, which I'm going to ask formally in a moment. But I feel like you've already shared a bunch of great things. I mean, speaking pro bono or for not your full pay at conferences as a way of both giving back, but also being visible, because it's much easier to get hired to speak if people have seen you speak. So there's a way in which if people are too stingy about where they're willing and when they're willing to speak and for how much, then they sort of limit the number of stages they're on. And I don't just mean like physical stages. It could be interviews or podcasts or, and anything that gives them a chance to tell their story or share their concepts. But it also sounds like you nurture relationships, which is the question I'm always asking during this show. It's like you have your inner circle of people that you'll either stay in touch with or easily catch up with again when you see them. But then there's always this sort of second and third tier or second and third layer out, the people you see, for instance, once a year at a conference, or you worked with 5 years ago and you haven't had a reason to since. I should mention these are people that you would enjoy seeing again. You liked each other. So I was curious, like how people spend time staying in touch. Like how do you stay top of mind for these kinds of looser connections? Any habits, philosophies, or practices that you do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis?
Yes, great question. I'll start with a concrete example. So I had done a book talk in Kansas City to launch my book on employee research groups, and I got inspired by that because I said, "Hey, I really should do one in LA where I live," and I did it. And it was a good intimate crowd, but it was the classification of the people. It was people who I had seen but haven't seen in a while, friends, colleagues, networks. And I posted about it and I said, hey, if anyone would like me to come to their city, let me know. And one of my good friends from Vancouver, where I grew up, said, hey, I got a bookstore for you. Let's do it. So we ended up doing one. This was just about a week and a half ago. And the whole crew came out. Like it was people I'd worked with like back in the day, right? When I lived there. And this was 20 years ago. And it was like a reunion. We all went out to dinner after. It gives me chills because we're all working on this in our own way, but we're not alone. But it can feel like that because we're in our different corners, but there's such a community. So I would say, just keeping in mind who is in your network on your team, and saying hi every once in a while. I used to handwrite cards to people and send my little holiday update. I usually would send it like by March because that's the Iranian Persian New Year. So I was like, I'm going to give myself a little extra time because I could never get it done by like January or December, right? So I was like, I'm normed to a different calendar, y'all. But anyways, so I would do that sometimes. I'll send people stuff, but that's because I want to. It's not because I'm forced to. Um, yeah, and I think, whenever, oh gosh, Robbie, when do you remember when we used to travel? So when I used to travel a lot, I would make a point, whatever city I'm in, to go and see someone else unrelated to the talk or event I'm a part of. But I would say, hey, while I'm in town, can I go see you? And this is how I would end up, and would see a tour of like the Coca-Cola office, or the tour of Toyota when I was in Texas because they had moved from Southern California. And so people were really just inviting, to show me around, and I just got to learn a lot. So it's a living education, but there's a lot of pride in what people do, and I really want to honor that.
One of the things I hear you mention in a few different ways is that you invited these opportunities. You didn't wait for them. So you said, "Hey, I'm willing to come to your city, right? Or I'm going to be in your city. Is there any way we can meet up?" Right? Like you sort of throughout these stories, you're saying like, "I would like some reconnection. Who else wants that too?" And so you've sort of invited the opportunity to happen, and then you followed through on it. Like you didn't just say like, "Oh, that would be kind of hard." Oh, really, Vancouver? I mean, it's been 20 years. Am I going to go all the way back there? But you were like, no, sure, let's do this. And then because you'd said you offered the invitation, you followed through on it, and then you had the opportunity for this reunion, right? Like, or you were going to go to a city and you said, hey, while I'm in this city, who else will I know here? And you put that out there, and then someone said yes, and you followed through, and then you end up getting a great tour, right? Like, I think that there's a way in which other people move through life with like more blinders on, and they're missing opportunities that are like right next to them, like literally one lane over, and they don't want to see it. And you're like, well, that would, I always think when I'm traveling, I'm always thinking like what airport, what major hubs I'm going through. I actually ran into one of my best friends. I was in an international airport, and we crossed paths, which
Oh,
was like wild.
that's
I hadn't seen her
amazing.
in person in
I
such a
love
long
that.
time, and like we only figured it out because I was posting that we were going somewhere, and then I happened to see her thing, and we figured it out like 2 days beforehand. And I was like, "Is there a chance you're going to be going through this particular airport?" And like, it was a yes, and the timing overlapped. I mean, that was wild, and that's the kind of thing that I want. For me, it's like serendipity is more likely to happen if you know what you're looking for. And you sound like a person that's looking for more serendipity to happen. You're like, oh, let's make this happen, but you're inviting it. And I think that's really cool. And I hope others listening can think about how they can parlay that in their own life. It also sounds like you're super active on LinkedIn and in a real kind of way. There's a couple people that I follow on LinkedIn, and shout out to my team member Ann Bono, who is like leading the charge on this front. But I love that my LinkedIn is now real conversations. It's like once you fall into this sort of world, you start to follow certain people, and like the kind of posts you see are just so great. And so now I'm gonna have to add you to the people that I
Oh,
check in with all the
same.
time, because I'm
Ditto to
like,
you.
that's just so neat to me that there's these. It's like LinkedIn felt very static for such a long time, and now it feels like a living thing. It feels like something that's very vibrant, but it really has to do with what people you follow or what hashtags you follow.
Right.
And you're part of what's creating that, and you're attracting people in, and that makes you memorable and helps you stay in touch with people who saw you on stage, and then they want to refer you because they see you as an actual human being, right? It's like it's a little bit of like, it's the who you know and it's what you know, but it's actually who knows what you know and will they remember you. And it seems like you've got that nailed down. As we're wrapping up here, I always have a closing question around sort of like a year from now, because you're a person I'm going to want to stay in touch with. Let's say a year from now, I realize it's been a year since we did this interview. And I'm going to want to, of course, hear about all of your updates, all your exciting news. What are we going to be celebrating for you a year from now? What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
Definitely want to see more of my content out there. I don't know what form it's going to take, but I would like to see some of it recorded and shared, and it to be more accessible, not just at a one-time event or if you're a part of a client. So I really believe in democratizing access to all of this information. So we'll see some of that. I think there's definitely going to be more writing in my future and more storytelling, so we'll see what form that takes, whether it be digital or something else that's print. So stay tuned for that. I will surprise myself to see what direction I go. I'm in the midst of some decisions. But I think just more of getting the message out and maybe a little more video. I've had requests from people. It's funny, right? Like while I was in Vancouver, folks are like, we need to see more video of you. We see the pictures, but we want to hear you. So, message heard. And I think just, everywhere we go, there's a lot of learnings. So I just would love to share more of that.
Brilliant. I can't wait to celebrate all of that with you, helping you get your message out into the world. It's an excellent thing to motivate towards. I think others will benefit hugely. And if anyone listening has opportunities for you to be seen or heard somewhere, they should definitely reach out. Speaking of which, how can people find you and follow your work?
Great question. I have a website. It's www.farzananayani.com. So it's my first and last name. We also are in the middle of launching a new one called ERG Dynamics. So you can go there, ergdynamics.com. My handles on social are at Farzana Nayani. So I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And we also have at ERG Dynamics. So lots of places to find us.
Fascinating. I love that you're now really branding yourself around the ERGs, the employer resource groups. As I mentioned to you as we were getting on air, my wife has just stepped down. She was the immediate past chair of a ERG, an LGBT ERG in the ed tech space. And she looked through your book and said it's going to help her as she does planning for next year, making sure the metrics tie back to the organization. And they already were doing some pretty good recruitment, but some of the principles you had in there, she said, this underscores what we've been doing. And I said, well, you need to share this to the other ERGs. And she's like, you're right, because we are all coming from it differently. Like, she has a communication background, so she's coming at it with that lens. But I think everyone should have access to the same kind of format or process. And it sounds like you've really simplified that, created a great path forward for anyone who's part of an ERG. Definitely check that out. I'm going to put all the links, including to the books that you have and your LinkedIn, your website, and all this stuff. I'll put it all at ontheschmooze.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure.